So you just got your brand new iPhone and you want to make the most out of your cameras, but you don't know what settings you should have turned on, or honestly even what all of the settings mean. That's exactly what the point of today's video is. I'm going to walk you guys through all the camera settings on the brand new iPhones for both photo and video. And even if you have a previous iPhone model, a lot of these same settings and rules will apply. So we'll take a deep dive through all the settings, but also I'm going to share with you guys how I edit these photos and really get the most out of my camera on the iPhone. So sit back, relax, make sure you follow along, drop this video a thumbs up, be sure you subscribe to the channel, and let's jump right into it. All right, so I'm going to have my phone open. We're going to walk through this all together. So first thing, let's go into the settings. Then you're going to scroll down, find your camera, and we're going to start right here. Now, I would personally like to kind of separate this photo and video, but for the sake of you guys following along, we're just going to go down the entire list of the camera settings within the iPhone. It's a little bit easier to follow along this way. So let's just start with the very top. So record video. This is the key part of how you set up your video settings. Now, these days, I think 4K is pretty standard, so obviously you want to have 4K turned on. And then it's kind of the debate on, are you shooting 24 frames per second or 30? This is always kind of the debate in the creator world, which one's better. Personally, I like to film most of my stuff in 24 frames per second. I like the way that you get some of that natural blur, but I will say when you're recording stuff with your iPhone, I actually think 24 sometimes looks a little jittery. So unless I'm matching it to, me filming on like my Sony camera right now, I will have 4K 30 turned on. I personally hate the way that 4K 60 frames per second looks. The only time I'm ever shooting 60 is if I'm slowing that down to make it slow motion. So for me, 4K 30 is the move. Now moving down, show PAL format. I live in the United States, so I'm just going to leave that turned off. Enhanced stabilization. This is basically just a setting that's going to help stabilize some of your footage, which it's actually really impressive on these phones, so I'm going to have that turned on. Next up, action mode, lower light. I personally don't really use a ton of action mode, so I'm just going to leave that turned off. HDR video, I definitely recommend turning that off. I just don't think it looks very good. And then auto frames per second. I personally like to be able to control my FPS, so I'm going to leave that turned off. The next feature is to lock the camera. Now I keep this turned off. This is basically just if you're recording a video, can you swap between the different lenses, in the middle of recording? You could have this turned on. I personally have it turned off just because sometimes I'm recording something and I do change the lenses, but it's not really a make or break option for me. And again, with honestly any of these settings, this isn't the only way to do it. I kind of want to tell you guys all the different settings, what they mean, so you can decide for yourself and what your creative needs are. Maybe some of these things you want turned on, maybe some of them you want turned off. That's totally fine. But to me, I'm going to have lock camera turned off. And I definitely recommend having the lock white balance turned on. When you're recording video, to me, the number one thing that shows how amateur you are is if you are recording a video and the white balance is changing all over the place. Maybe you're walking around your apartment and over here it's cool, over here it's warm, and your phone just doesn't really know what to stay at. If you lock that, your exposure and all that stuff is going to change, but it's going to lock that white balance so it isn't looking, warm then cold, then warm then cold all over the place. Definitely recommend keeping that white balance locked. So that's it for the record video. So we'll back out of there. Record slow-mo. Now I personally don't really record a ton of slow motion stuff with my phone, but if I am going to do it, I might as well have the best option. So I'm going to have 1080p HD at 240 frames per second. That's going to be a really nice looking slow motion. Back out of that, let's go down to record cinematic. Now we'll dive into this a little bit more later, but I personally don't really use cinematic mode a ton on the phone. I will say though, with the new 15 Pro Max, I do want to test it out a little bit more, but I usually am just using the standard video mode. But again, I might as well have it turned on to the best of its capabilities. So I'm going to have 4K at 30 FPS to kind of match what I said earlier. Back out of that. Now formats is kind of the main area for a lot of the settings, so definitely pay attention to this part. So the first option is an important one, and it is the camera capture. Now, do you want high efficiency or most compatible? Personally, the way I utilize my phone, this is not my main creative device. I use my professional mirrorless cameras that I have here in my office and that I'm recording on right now to do a lot of my professional work. My iPhone is kind of an extension of that when I don't have the ability to use one of my professional cameras or I'm just documenting my everyday life. So most compatible might be able to make things a little bit easier to edit or sometimes larger file sizes. So personally for me, I'd rather have high efficiency turned on. That's going to be more compressed files, which for me in my everyday life is totally perfect. Now the next thing down is going to be photo capture. Okay, so this is definitely on the 15 Pros. Now for the past few years, 12 megapixels was the standard with the cameras. Well, with the 15 Pro, that main angle, your 1x lens, you now have the ability to shoot 24 megapixels instead of 12. So I'm going to have 24 turned on just to get that little extra resolution. which is nice. The next up is the Pro RAW and resolution control. Now, this does not mean you're turning Pro RAW on. That just then shows on your camera app the setting that you can turn on and off. So it's just the control. So I'm gonna have that turned on. And then if you guys see here, if you open up the camera app, you see how in the upper right here, it says high efficiency max. It's just allowing that setting to show up there so you can turn it off whenever you want yourself. So it's not necessarily turning that on, it's just turning on the ability for you to turn it on and off without diving back into your settings to do so. Now for Pro Default, this is an important one. You have 3 options. Now I actually heard this word is called HEIF. HEIF? That just doesn't sound like a real word. So we're just gonna say high efficiency, but that's what I mean by that. But you have 3 versions. So if you're shooting that Pro RAW format for photos, you basically have 3 different file types you can choose from. High efficiency max up to 48 megapixels, Pro RAW 12 megapixels, or Pro RAW max, which is 48 megapixels. And one thing I will say in most of these settings, Apple has text underneath the different options that kind of gives you a little bit more info and insight into what they all are. But between these 3 options, it's basically just different compression levels. If you want to get the largest file and probably the most high quality file type, go for the Pro RAW max. Like I said earlier, for myself, I'm mostly using this phone for leisure stuff, behind the scenes photos, etc. So I don't really want the biggest file types possible because this is still kind of my personal phone as well. So for me, high efficiency max 48 megapixels is plenty. If you want the biggest, baddest file type, go for the Pro RAW max, but that's the option I'm gonna have turned on. Back out of that, down here for video capture, Apple ProRes. Again, this is like the one above where it just turns on the control for it. It does not mean every single video you shoot now is gonna be in ProRes. I don't know why they don't have a little control word next to that. That'd be nice, but go ahead and turn that on and then I'll show you. Go over to video. You see how it has ProRes as the option right there, just like it did for photos. It turns on that option so you can turn it on and off in there. ProRes encoding. Now this is an important one. You have HDR, SDR, and then log. So Apple log is a new thing on these new phones, which is really exciting. In case you don't know what log is, it's basically a picture of profile that is on different cameras. Like right now I'm shooting on the Sony FX3 and I'm shooting in Sony S-Log3, and I'll turn it on and off so you guys can kind of see. But if you aren't familiar with log footage, that's okay. This might be a little over your head, but let me explain it to those who care. A log picture profile is basically a very low contrast, desaturated picture. And the entire point of that is when you go into color grade that footage, you have a lot more room to work with. You have a higher dynamic range. So you have more details in the highlights as well as more details in the shadows. And it gives you a little bit more room to work with your color grading. That's a really hard thing to do. Honestly, a few years ago, it just started to become more normal for cameras. So the fact that it's now in this tiny iPhone is a really impressive pro feature. And I think it's something that a lot of people are gonna be excited about. Now, I actually recently dropped a video doing a full day in the life using this iPhone as a content creator, where I tested out the logged video a ton. If you want to go check that out, highly recommend that video. I think it turned out dope. But I will say the Apple log is actually really impressive on this phone. Is it perfect in every scenario? No. Does everybody need to use it? No. Am I going to use it every single time I record video? No. But it is a really nice option to have, and you should know what it is before you use it. So I have that turned on, and then that's it for this section. So we'll back out of there. Now the next section is preserve settings. So preserve settings is basically, this whole section right here is gonna come down to a lot of your own preference. This is basically just every time you open up the camera app, you know, you switch it over to video, you switch it over to wide angle, ProRes, whatever. When you then close out of the app and then you open it back up again, that's what preserve settings means. It basically just means what settings do you want to preserve for the next time you open up the camera app. So camera mode basically just defaults it back to whatever mode you had turned on. So if you're shooting video, the next time you open up your camera, it's going to go back to video. I personally have that turned off just because in my mind, I'm used to photo being the default, and most of the time I am doing photo. So I'm fine with it just kind of always going back to default. Creative control, I don't really mess with a ton of those in the iPhone. So I'm going to leave that section turned off. That's like if you do some of the picture modes, lighting modes, that type of stuff, I'm leaving that turned off. Depth control, again, we'll dive into this a little bit later here, but I don't use a ton of the portrait modes or things like that. So I'm going to leave that section turned off. Macro control, I like seeing that. So I'll have that turned on. Exposure adjustment, I like to have that one stay put, and you'll see why here a little bit later. Night mode I have turned off. Portrait zoom, I actually have that turned on. I actually want that off, so I'm gonna turn that off. Action mode, I have that turned off. Pro RAW and resolution control, as I mentioned before, I like seeing that on, so I'm gonna turn that on there. Apple ProRes, I'm gonna turn that on. And then live photo, turn that on. Back out. Now these are just some kind of standard settings that have been on iPhones for a long time, but I'll just walk you guys through what I have. Record stereo sound, I have that turned on. Use volume up for burst photos. I don't really like burst photos that much, so I have that section turned off. Scan QR codes. We all know if you point your phone at a QR code, it has that little thing that pops up so you can click it. I have that turned on. Show detected text, very similar to the QR code, just for detecting text. I have that turned on. For composition, the grid, I like to have that turned on. When you go back over your camera mode, you see how it has the little grid on there. That's just what that means. It helps you kind of get a better looking composition. The level, now when you're shooting a photo, you have this little line that comes up to help you shoot straight, which is really nice. I have that turned on. Mirror front camera, I have that turned off. This is a very amateur move. A lot of times if people leave that turned on, if you take a photo, it's basically gonna flip all your logos. Keep that turned off. It's gonna help you out a lot more. It looks way better. View outside the frame. So this basically is just when you have the camera app open, can you see outside of the frame up here, down there, or can you only see the crop that you have selected? I personally like to have the view outside the frame turned on, but just preference. Now the photographic styles, this is something I personally don't touch, but for a lot of people, you might actually enjoy these. This is basically a baked in preset that the iPhone offers. And some of these are not bad at all. I personally just edit all of the photos myself in Lightroom, which I'm gonna touch on here in a few. So I personally don't use any of these, but if you don't wanna edit any of your photos ever, maybe mess around with some of these. Leave these turned on, select one and see if you like how the style looks. But I'm gonna leave those turned off. Now for the next setting, go to main camera. So on the iPhone 15 Pro with that new 1X camera, how it has a higher resolution now, it actually has a few different lenses baked into it. So it's usually just a 24mm, but now you can click that 1X and it will not only make it 24, but 28 and 35. So these options are just turning that on, so you can choose that if you want. And then when you have the camera app open with the 1X zoom, you click that, you see how it goes from 24 to 28 to 35. That's just what that is doing. And then it's just asking what default do you want to open your phone with. Portraits and photo mode. So I'm not a huge portrait mode person, but what this does is basically it takes a photo, and if you're taking it of, I think it's a human, a dog, and a cat, it's going to take a normal photo, but it's also going to basically make it a portrait photo on the back end, so you can change it into a portrait photo later on if you want. So it doesn't really matter to me too much, but I might as well have that turned on. I have prioritize faster shooting turned off. That's basically if you're just shooting something really fast, it might lower the quality of the photo just to get the shot done. I personally have that turned off, but depending on your situation, maybe you want to have it turned on. Lens correction, that's just going to help kind of a wonky wide angle lens. Then macro control, I also have that turned on. I just like to be able to see the option. So that's pretty much it for in the settings itself. Okay, so let's go over to the actual camera app itself. So at the bottom here, you have all the different camera modes that you can utilize. Personally, for myself, I mostly just use the normal photo and the normal video. I don't shoot a ton of cinematic or slow-mo video. And then for photo, I usually just go with the standard. I don't always use the portrait, but they're really nice features to have if you use them. If you click that little top arrow up here, it gives you some more options. You can turn on your flash, the night mode stuff. You can turn on and off live photo, picture style, crop, and then the exposure comp. Now, I think by default, the iPhones overexpose photos a little bit. So I always have my exposure comp set to -0.3. It's just a personal choice, but that's what I have for mine. And then as I mentioned earlier, you have that high efficiency max option at the top of your phone. So you can turn that on and off as desired. That way you don't have to go back into your settings to turn that on and off. You can do it right there when you're actually, trying to take a photo and you have your photo app open. It's right there. And the same thing for video. You go over to video and I have that ProRes log option right there. You can just tap that, turn it on and off. And if you want to change any of your frame rates or resolution, it's right over there on your phone as well as the action mode. And I definitely recommend you guys to try out all the different features of your phone. This is just personally how I use the phone the most, but depending on your style or what you're trying to get out of your phone, some people are out here running entire Instagram pages or YouTube channels with just their phone. So some of these modes might be more important to you than others, but personally for myself and how I utilize this phone, it's a lot of the behind the scenes type of content for myself. So a lot of times just kind of the standard, or I call it like the professional standard options, are kind of what's best for me personally. All right, so now you took some photos. How do you make them look good? So I'm gonna open up Lightroom Mobile. All right, so I have Lightroom Mobile open right now. I imported a photo that I shot with my iPhone, but I'm gonna give you guys a quick crash course on how I edit my photos in Lightroom Mobile. If you want a more in-depth video on this sometime, let me know down in the comments below. But here's the first thing I do. And yes, this is gonna be a little bit of a plug, but I personally use my own Lightroom presets. If you guys wanna pick up my Lightroom presets for yourself, they will be the first link down in the description below. For me, it's kind of just a nice base to start, and and then I kind of build off of that. Regardless if you pick up my own, you'll still be able to follow along just fine. Like I said, I kind of go through my presets here and I find something that would, you know, be a good starting base. And the nice thing about mine is a lot of them work on most types of photos. Honestly, these all look pretty good. I think I'm gonna go with taxi. So taxi looks pretty good, but we're gonna make a few adjustments to it. Most presets don't look perfect right off the rip and don't expect them to. So the first things to try out are one, the exposure, and then the highlights, shadows, and then the color temperature, okay? So first thing, I actually think it looks pretty good already. The highlights, let's raise those up a little bit. The shadows, I kind of want those a little bit darker. That's looking pretty good. You can go over to the color. Again, sometimes the photo's looking warmer or cooler than you want. So for this, I think right there, -6 looks pretty good. You can mess around with the tint, the vibrance, saturation, all that type of stuff. This looks honestly pretty good. Another thing I go into all the time is going to be the color mix. So if I go into this, you can select one specific color and then mess around with the settings of that. Little bonus tip here is your 3 settings within here, the hue, saturation, and luminance. Hue is basically, let's go to blue so you can actually see what I'm saying. So the hue is going to change the actual hue, which is essentially like changing the color of the color you have selected. So I have blue selected. See how it's changing the buildings to blue to green. We want that basically just where it was at. So I'm just going to go up here and hit back. So it goes back. It's -6 there. Saturation just increases or decreases the intensity of that color. So blue, kind of want a little bit desaturated. And then luminance is just how bright that blue is. Is it dark? Is it light? So I mess around with that in there. I think that looks pretty good. And then the other setting I mess around with quite a bit. Texture, clarity, you can mess around with. I don't do anything too crazy with them. And I suggest you not be one of those people out there who just bumps their clarity to 100. We all don't like you. It looks like crap. But I do love some grain on my photos. This is a polarizing thing. And again, all photo editing just comes down to preference, but I enjoy a little bit of grain on my photos. I like that style. So I'm gonna bump this up to, I don't know, 28, and I'm gonna lower the size of it a little bit. And then if you zoom in here, you have a little bit of grain, which I like the way that looks. And then the only other thing I ever do is mess around with the healing. If you know you need to heal like a blemish or clean up something on the floor, on the desk, wherever you are shooting, you can use the healing brush for that. And then the mask is if you need to brush out something and kind of change something in a very specific area, that would be the mask. But after that, you can go in the crop and change whatever crop you want. If I'm going to Instagram, I'm doing 4:5, but for the sake of this video, I'm just gonna keep it as standard. Go up to export, and I'm gonna hit save copy to device. It's going to export the photo. So guys, that is your mini crash course on Lightroom Mobile, and that is all my camera settings I currently have on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Like I said, a lot of these settings and things are going to come down to how you personally use your phone, how important some of the pro features are, how often you use them. Are you shooting a lot of photos? Are you shooting a lot of videos? Are you trying to have this be your professional camera, or is it more kind of a behind the scenes camera or a B camera like it is for myself? But I hope at least with me explaining all the different settings, you guys got some value out of it, and it's going to be able to help you out on your own creative journeys. Because the cool thing about this day and age we live in are these phones are getting so good, you can do a ton of stuff with them. So guys, that's gonna be it for me in today's video. I hope you enjoyed watching. Be sure to go follow me over on Instagram if you want to see some more content that I put out on a daily basis. A lot of things I'm posting over there is actually shot with my iPhone. Fun fact, about 99% of the Instagram stories that I post were taken with my iPhone and edited within Lightroom Mobile. Throw a preset on them, export them, put them up, and it just makes your stuff look that much better compared to other people out there. Like I said, if you want to pick up my Lightroom presets or maybe my video LUT for Apple Log, they are down in the first link in the description below. You can check out all my digital assets over there. Be sure to drop this video a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel as well. And I will catch you guys in the next video very, very soon. Peace, guys.